Well, welcome to the 700 Club. We're so glad you could join us. Well, our news story, taking a tough line. In his first foreign policy speech as Commander-in-Chief, Joe Biden sent a bold warning to America's adversaries, Russia and China.
The president also said the United States would end its support for Saudi Arabia's military offensive in Yemen. What other foreign policy moves are in the making? Well, here's CBN White House correspondent Ben Kennedy.
America is back. America is back.
President Joe Biden chose the State Department for his first visit to a federal agency, where he said diplomacy is back.
This war has to end. And to underscore our commitment, we are ending all American support for offensive operations in the war in Yemen, including relevant arms sales.
Since taking office, Biden has spoken to 10 world leaders in an effort, he says, to repair relations damaged during the Trump administration.
I made it clear to President Putin, in a manner very different from my predecessor.
Unlike the previous administration, we will be taking steps to hold Russia accountable for the range of malign activities that it has undertaken. That includes interfering in America's democracy. It includes the poisoning of citizens on European soil with chemical weapons.
Michael O'Hanlon with the Brookings Institution says this approach reflects bipartisanship consensus that the U.S. needs to be tougher on Russia.
Especially over the last 7 or 8 years, dating back to the end of the Obama presidency and continuing through the Trump presidency, even though, of course, President Trump himself personally favored a little bit of a softer line on Russia. But he never persuaded his fellow Republicans or Democrats to take that approach.
The commander-in-chief then pointed to the nation he calls America's most serious competitor.
We'll confront China's economic abuses, counter its aggressive, coercive action to push back on China's attack on human rights, intellectual property, and global governance.
The hard question is really, what do you do about it? You know, where are you going to cooperate with China? Where are you going to be tough? Which tariffs are you going to keep in place? Which technology restrictions? Which kinds of military scenarios concern you? What are you going to do about them?
Biden also announced increasing the number of refugees admitted into the U.S. to 125,000 a year. That's a big jump from the 15,000 allowed under the Trump administration. Ben Kennedy, CBN News.
Well, lots of changes in our foreign policy, but what may escape notice is that proxy war in Yemen. You may think of Yemen as just the small Middle East republic and country, and what is our strategic interest in it? But it's a proxy war, and on one side is Saudi Arabia, and the other side is Iran. What Iran is trying to do is control the oil routes. There's the Strait of Hormuz, but there's a strait off the coast of Yemen. And if they're able to control that, they can literally control all the oil that ever flows from the Middle East. They'll be able to control both of them. And so if we back out of this and back out of supporting Saudi Arabia in this, we're actually playing right into the Iranian plan, which is to control oil going out from the Middle East. So be careful here. This is one where if you embolden Iran, is that good for world peace? Well, in other news, Democrats in Congress have taken an unprecedented action against a new member. Ephraim Graham has that story from our CBN newsroom. Ephraim?
Gordon, a sharply divided House removed Republican Marjorie Taylor Greene from the Budget and Education committees. Democrats said she deserved it because she had spread violent and hateful ideas. Greene said she's changed.
These were words of the past, and these things do not represent me.
Republicans said Greene should not be punished because of remarks she made before being elected, and they said they could do the same thing to Democrats in the future. Former President Donald Trump has said no to a Democratic request he testify under oath at his impeachment trial. Trump's attorneys denounced the request as a, quote, public relations stunt. The trial begins Tuesday. Republican Senator Rand Paul repeatedly pressed Biden's nominee for Education Secretary Miguel Cardona on transgender high school athletes at his confirmation hearing Wednesday.
Do you think it's fair to have boys running in the girls' track meet? I think it's appropriate I think it's the legal responsibility of schools to provide opportunities for students to participate in activities, and this includes students who are transgender.
Paul said he believes most people in the country would think the idea of boys competing in girls' sports was bizarre and unfair. Other critics argue that President Biden's LGBTQ executive order could end girls' and women's sports as we've known them and pave the way for boys and men to enter their bathrooms and locker rooms. LGBTQ advocates say the order would end discrimination. Heather Sells has this story.
On Inauguration Day, Kamala Harris embodied what girls and women across the country have long dreamed, a woman vice president. Hours later, however, President Biden signed an executive order that crushed girls' and women's rights. Using detailed, explicit language, he ordered that children be allowed access to the restroom, locker room, and sports team of their choosing. Their gender, now described as gender identity, would have no consequence.
It's turning equality upside down. The entire reason we have separate male and female locker rooms and sports teams is that people with male and female bodies should have a certain amount of privacy and safety and fairness in competition.
LGBTQ advocates say the order supports equality and ends discrimination against people who identify as transgender. But conservatives and some feminists have been crying foul using the hashtag Biden erased women. The Women's Liberation Front called the order a heartbreaking message to women and girls that their government does not view them as worthy of consideration and is not willing to recognize them as a discrete class. Others view it as a First Amendment violation.
This is a show of force. This is about showing who's in control and that dissent is punished.
Federal agencies have 100 days to determine how to implement the order. For any business, faith-based organization, or school receiving federal funding, opposing it could be a costly decision. There's also concern the order could confuse children and what it would mean for girls in sports.
We've watched as young female athletes have lost out on medals, on podium spots, on championship opportunities.
Attorney Christiana Holcomb represents 3 female high school track stars who sued the state of Connecticut after being forced to compete against biological boys. Under President Trump, the Department of Education defended them, and that would likely now change. Biden's executive order seeks to build on the 2020 Supreme Court ruling that redefined sex discrimination to include gender identity, but only in cases of employment. Holcomb says the president's order contradicts Title IX, the historic law that paved the way for sports equality in 1972.
Title IX is clear that young women deserve to compete on a level playing field. The whole reason we have women's sports as a separate category is because of those physical differences between the sexes.
It's now wait and see to find out how this executive order will play out among federal agencies like education and labor. States are also debating gender with a host of new bills on sports and transgender medicine. Heather Sells, CBN News.
Turning now to Israel, where a remarkable discovery from 3,000 years ago sheds new light on the Bible, from Genesis to the Gospels. Chris Mitchell brings us that story from Jerusalem.
The discovery took place on this hill in southern Israel. Archaeologists found the royal color purple fragments in the Timna Valley, and through carbon dating, confirmed the fabric had been preserved for 3,000 years.
The real excitement was when Naama, Dr. Naama Sukenik, called me one day. She told me, well, we found this proof, the molecules of the color from the lab. It's true purple.
True purple comes from an ancient, sophisticated process using dye extracted from sea snails found in the Mediterranean Sea. It usually took a lot of work and thousands of snails, which made the dye sometimes worth more than gold. The dry desert conditions in the valley preserved the fabric.
So we found in Timna the argaman, the more purplish color, which is associated with kings, also the priests and also the tabernacle. It provides an excellent background to the biblical record for this particular time.
The region is mentioned a number of times in the Bible. The Timnah Valley is located in the Negev Desert in southern Israel, and it's also the area of the kingdom of Edom.
In the book of Genesis, chapter 36, we hear about the kings of Edom that ruled over the land of Edom before Israel had kings.
This land is also where Gideon defeated the Midianites.
We hear in the book of Judges about the kings of Midian. When Gideon, he killed all the Midianite kings, the spoil is actually the purple, the argaman garments. So we really have a physical evidence. You can, touch the garment of an important figure, if not the king, of these people 3,000 years ago.
And where David defeated his foes.
We read in the Bible that King David went to south of the Dead Sea, the Valley of Salt, in the book of Samuel. And then he conquered the Edomites and put garrisons all over the land.
Royal purple is also mentioned in the New Testament. Lydia from Thyatira in the book of Acts was known as a seller of purple, and purple is mentioned in the Gospels.
We hear that the Romans, they actually forced Jesus to wear a purple robe in preparation to the crucifixion. The Romans claimed that he wanted to become the king of the Jews.
Ben Yosef believes this discovery revolutionizes our understanding of the Bible.
I think that this is a game changer in the way archaeologists and biblical scholars understand the reality at that time period.
Some archaeologists dismiss the Bible because there's no traditional architectural evidence for ancient kingdoms like a city or a palace. But he says they were nomadic kingdoms that left little evidence behind.
If you change the way you think about kings and kingdoms in this early period, and you understand that nomadic tribes could have had a kingdom, then suddenly everything, I think, becomes much more simpler to understand and to interpret.
He sees the pieces of royal purple fabric as evidence of these ancient biblical kingdoms and their kings. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Royal purple looks quite good. Gordon?
Well, it's archaeology proving the Bible again and again and again. And it's literally every time you hear a new archaeological discovery coming out of Israel, it reinforces the biblical narrative. In just a few days, we're going to be releasing the latest of written in stone on the House of David, the archaeological evidence for the kingdom of David, the House of David, for Solomon. Archaeologists long doubted, was there ever really a kingdom there? And now they're having proof, and the proof is coming right out of Jerusalem.